Well, as we just heard in Stephen's report, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said that he was, quote, very pleased at news that experts in Syria had begun the process of destroying the country's chemical weapons. I spoke to Stephen Miles, the coalition coordinator for Win Without War, and asked him what he thought about Kerry's statement about the good start in Syria.
I think Secretary Kerry is right. This is a positive beginning. It's a good start. We're going to have to wait and see how it plays out, but there's reason to be optimistic. And you're absolutely right. Some of the very same people who said there's no chance that this is going to work out were the very same people who said there's no chance that diplomacy will succeed. The only thing we can do is bomb. And interestingly enough, they're some of the same people that have been wrong about most of the national security questions over the last 10, 15 years. So it's not surprising that they're wrong on this one, but hopefully we'll get a little bit better in the future at not listening to them.
Well, Secretary of State did kind of measure it by saying, well, it's just the beginning. Yeah. We're going to have to wait and see. So there still are a lot of people who have real kind of deep suspicions about the Assad government and how much they're willing to really turn over.
I mean, I think this is like a lot of issues in diplomacy. There's people that question the Assad regime, and that's okay. Diplomacy is not built on making best friends with your opposition. It's not built on trusting your opponents. It's built on trying to get what's in your interest in the best possible way out of a deal. So in this case, America's interests are most served by getting rid of the chemical weapons in Syria, and then in the long term, in the medium term, by having a political solution that ends the Syrian civil war, that ends the suffering on all sides. For none of that to happen, do we need to become best friends with Assad? Do we need to trust him? Do we need to like him? But what we need to do is we need to test him. We need to do things like say, if you're willing to give up your chemical weapons, if you say you are, here's the opportunity, now go ahead and do it. And in that, under that metric, what we're seeing right now is the Assad regime is cooperating. They've been going along with the UN's plan, and God willing, we're going to get rid of these chemical weapons in a timely fashion. We can get on to that ending of the civil war that we're hoping for.
There was an interview with Assad did with Der Spiegel, the magazine, where he tended to kind of throw a wet blanket on the peace talks in Geneva. How much is that going to impact things moving forward in November for these talks, do you think?
I think you see a lot of back and forth in the run-up to talks. You kind of see it all the time. There was when this round of talks was originally supposed to be going, the Americans were actually somewhat skeptical. They were saying Assad was a bit too strong. We've seen the Syrian opposition have different positions on the talks at different times, and of course we see the splintering and lots of different factions within the opposition saying different things. What's going to matter again is when they get in the room in Geneva, when they sit down, when they go forward. And what's going to matter is, can the U.S., can the Russians, can the Iranians, can the Assad regime, can the opposition, can they come to an agreement that advances the interests of most of the parties, if not all of the parties, and find a way to end this? Before that, there's going to be lots of talk, there's going to be lots of hype. That's what happens in diplomacy. We shouldn't be surprised. We should keep going and keep looking for what's in our interest and see if we get there.
What about the refugee situation, which keeps spiraling out of control? Are there any easy answers there?
There's no easy answers there. I mean, the refugee crisis is significant, it's dramatic. It's in a region that already had a refugee crisis, whether it was the Palestinians or the Iraqis in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq. There's lots of internally displaced people, both in Syria and in those other countries. The refugee crisis is significant. One of the solutions is fully funding the refugee missions. Now, the U.S. has actually been a significant donor, but there's lots of room for both the U.S. and for international partners to give more. That money would go a long way and towards saving lives, towards making sure that these people who are now in other countries in these refugee camps, which is not a place anyone wants to be, can go about getting the necessities of life and begin kind of reestablishing some semblance of normalcy.
We're going to have to leave it there. Stephen Miles, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.